She abandoned her husband and 5 children overnight, but when she returned a decade later, she faced a truth she couldn't escape. Caleb Harris wasn't a perfect man, but he believed in the simple, sturdy things that built a life: hard work, honesty, and family. For years, he thought that was enough. He worked double shifts, coached Little League when he could, kissed scraped knees, and read bedtime stories while fighting exhaustion. He loved his wife, Vanessa Cole, deeply. They weren't flashy or rich, but Caleb thought they were strong enough to weather anything. Until one morning, he woke up to find her gone. There had been no warning, no screaming match the night before. No tears, no late-night whispers about doubt. Just a folded piece of paper left on the kitchen counter, sitting beside a half-empty coffee cup. 7 words scrawled in her hurried handwriting: "I'm sorry. I can't do this anymore." At first, he didn't understand. Caleb called her phone. Straight to voicemail. He checked with her sister, her friends. No one had heard anything. Panic bloomed in his chest, but when he realized she had taken nothing, no clothes, no mementos, not even the old locket she wore every day, the truth began to sink in. She hadn't just left him, she had left all of them. 5 children. Logan, Carter, Sophie, and the youngest 2, Nora and Evan, both too little to understand what abandoned meant. Evan was still in diapers. Nora had just started kindergarten. That day, the house felt cavernous and empty, despite being filled with toys, backpacks, and tiny shoes lined up by the door. The silence was deafening, broken only by the small, confused voices of his children. "Where's Mommy?" Sophie asked, tugging at his jeans. "Did we do something wrong?" Carter whispered, his voice trembling. Caleb knelt down, pulling them into his arms. He didn't have an answer, so he lied. "Mommy just needs some time," he said, forcing a smile that cracked at the edges. "She loves you very much." He told himself it was temporary, that she would realize her mistake. That she would come back through that front door, smiling sheepishly, apologizing for the confusion. But days turned into weeks. Weeks into months. Vanessa never returned, and chaos took her place. Caleb had been working 2 jobs: construction during the day, security at a warehouse by night, but childcare alone cost more than his entire second paycheck. He had no choice but to quit the night job. Bills piled up. Sleep became a luxury he could no longer afford. He burned dinners. He forgot about permission slips. He missed dentist appointments. But somehow, he survived. They all survived. Each day began at 5 a.m., when the world was still dark and quiet. Caleb would pour himself a cup of coffee into the same chipped mug Vanessa once loved. It sat heavily in his hands, no longer a token of her, but a reminder of everything he refused to let fall apart. By 6:30, the kitchen erupted with life. Pancakes flipping, Nora and Sophie arguing over bathroom turns, Evan crying about a missing sock. Logan, only 12 at the time, learned to pack lunches. Carter figured out how to braid Sophie's hair. There was never enough time to finish his coffee, but the rare moments of laughter, honest, chaotic, beautiful laughter, were the fuel that kept Caleb going. At the construction site, Caleb found a strange sense of peace. The clanking of tools, the roaring machines, the methodical rhythm of hard labor, it drowned out the worry, the anger, the loneliness. His supervisor, Mr. Franklin, a gruff man with calloused hands and a soft heart, often shook his head in disbelief. 5 kids and you're still standing, Harris? He'd say, half in awe. Caleb would just offer a tired smile. No one knew that he sometimes cried in his truck during lunch breaks, the weight of it all collapsing onto his shoulders for a few precious minutes before he wiped his face and soldiered on. Logan, barely out of childhood himself, became Caleb's right hand. He helped with dinner, corralled the younger siblings, calmed tantrums. He never once complained. But Caleb saw the toll it took: the quiet looks, the tired eyes. There were nights Caleb thought he couldn't keep going. Nights when he sat at the kitchen table staring at a stack of overdue bills, or struggled to help Carter with homework while Evan screamed for attention in the background. There were mornings he couldn't remember how he got from the bed to the job site. Afternoons, he drove past schools, wondering how many parent-teacher conferences he'd missed, how many concerts he'd skipped. But every time Sophie wrapped her arms around his waist and whispered, "I love you, Daddy," the cracks in his armor sealed just enough to keep standing. He missed weddings, he missed birthdays, he missed promotions his co-workers celebrated with rounds of beer at the bar. While others built careers, Caleb built a home, one missed meal, one homework assignment, one scraped knee at a time. And even as exhaustion hollowed him out, he never once considered giving up, because giving up would have meant giving up on them. He told himself he could wait a little longer. Maybe Vanessa would come back. Maybe she'd realize what she lost. Maybe. But with every birthday party organized with duct-tape balloons, every Christmas pie burnt in the oven, every tiny hand held on the walk to school, Caleb realized something he hadn't wanted to admit. They were enough. He and his kids, as broken, battered, and patched together as they were a family. He didn't need Vanessa to make them whole. And slowly, quietly, Caleb began to let go of the dream that she would come back. Not because he stopped loving her, but because he loved his children more. And that love, fierce and relentless, was the foundation he would build the rest of their lives upon. In that small kitchen, with the chipped coffee mug, the crayon drawings on the fridge, and the sticky notes of overdue bills, Caleb made a silent vow. No matter how tired he got, no matter how hard it became, no matter how much the world expected him to fail, he wouldn't let his family fall apart. Not then, not ever. Life didn't get easier after Vanessa Cole walked out of their lives. In fact, for Caleb Harris and his 5 children, it became a series of daily battles, fought not with swords and shields, but with alarm clocks, homework folders, burnt toast, and an endless stream of small but exhausting responsibilities. Every morning began before the sun rose. Caleb's alarm buzzed at 4:45 a.m., a relentless reminder that survival didn't allow for snooze buttons. He would stumble into the kitchen, rubbing sleep from his eyes, to start breakfast. Pancakes if there was time, toast and peanut butter if there wasn't. Logan Harris, now 13, had grown into an unspoken partner in the mission. He packed lunches, while Caleb wrangled the little ones into weather-appropriate clothes. Carter Harris always seemed to lose one shoe. Sophie Harris cried over hair tangles. Nora Harris would misplace her backpack, and Evan Harris, bless his little heart, usually started the day with a tearful protest over nothing and everything. There were days Caleb barely made it out the door on time. Days he showed up at the construction site with syrup on his shirt or crayon marks on his jeans. But he showed up. Every day. No excuses. Mr. Franklin, his supervisor, noticed. "You're a machine, Harris," he'd say, with a mixture of admiration and pity. At work, Caleb moved steel beams and poured concrete, letting the physical strain drown out the mental fatigue. He missed lunches to make up for mornings he left early to attend school meetings. He swapped shifts to make it to parent-teacher conferences. He worked weekends when the bills piled up. Money was always tight. After losing his second job, every dollar mattered. Caleb learned to stretch groceries, to patch clothes instead of buying new ones, to smile when the kids didn't notice that birthday cakes came from discounted day-old shelves. They lived in a small, worn house that smelled faintly of sawdust and soap. The roof leaked in the spring. The heater groaned in the winter, but it was theirs, and more importantly, it was filled with love. Evenings were a chaotic symphony of homework battles, soccer practices, lost permission slips, and sibling squabbles. Caleb learned how to braid Sophie's hair, how to fix leaky faucets with duct tape, how to make Halloween costumes out of cardboard and hope. Dinner was often late, sometimes burnt, and always loud. They ate together at the scratched-up kitchen table, laughing over inside jokes and sharing stories about their days. Caleb listened, soaking up every detail like a man starving for connection. The kids missed Vanessa. Of course they did. Sometimes, in the quiet moments before bed, Sophie would ask questions Caleb couldn't answer. Does she still love us? Why didn't she take us with her? Caleb would hold them close, murmur reassurances he wasn't sure he believed himself, and promise, above all else, that he wasn't going anywhere. The loneliness was a heavy, persistent ache. There were nights he sat alone in the dark living room after the kids had gone to bed, staring at the flickering television without seeing it. Nights he wondered if he was enough. If love alone could patch the holes left behind by abandonment. But then, there were mornings when Sophie proudly showed him a drawing she made at school, afternoons when Logan's teachers praised his leadership, evenings when Carter scored a goal at soccer practice and beamed up at him, waiting for his proud thumbs up. Those moments stitched Caleb's heart back together, thread by thread. He built traditions, small and sacred. Friday movie nights with microwaved popcorn and mismatched blankets. Saturday morning pancakes shaped like dinosaurs and hearts. Sunday walks to the park, even when the weather was cold and dreary. Christmas was the hardest. Vanessa's absence loomed larger against the backdrop of sparkling lights and holiday cheer, but Caleb refused to let it break them. He and the kids made paper snowflakes to tape on the windows. They baked lopsided cookies and drank too much hot chocolate. They opened gifts, carefully chosen from discount racks, laughing and hugging like the wealthiest family on earth. Through all the struggle, Caleb watched his children grow stronger, braver, more resilient. Logan, once a quiet boy, became a young man who carried the weight of the family without complaint. Carter developed a fierce loyalty to his siblings, stepping in when anyone needed defending. Sophie, despite her tender heart, learned how to find joy even when sadness lurked nearby. Nora and Evan, too young to remember the day Vanessa left, grew up surrounded by the kind of steady, unwavering love that Caleb vowed would never fail them. Every victory, no matter how small, felt monumental. The first time Evan tied his own shoes. The night Sophie overcame her fear of thunderstorms by holding Caleb's hand and whispering, "We're brave, right, Daddy?" The afternoon Logan came home with an acceptance letter to a special honors program, his eyes shining with pride. Caleb didn't mark these milestones with fanfare. There were no parades, no medals, just quiet moments of joy, private and sacred, tucked away like precious treasures. Life wasn't perfect. It was messy, exhausting, unpredictable, but it was also beautiful in the way only something fought for so fiercely could be. Caleb knew he couldn't protect his children from every hurt. He couldn't erase the absence of their mother, but he could show them every single day that they were loved beyond measure, that they mattered, that their story wasn't defined by who walked away, but by who stayed. And so, brick by brick, moment by moment, Caleb Harris built a life from the broken pieces Vanessa left behind, a life rooted in sacrifice, stitched together by small victories, and illuminated by a love that refused to quit. He didn't know what the future would bring, but he knew this. They had already survived the worst, and together they would face whatever came next. 10 years had passed since Vanessa Cole walked out of Caleb Harris's life, and for most of those years, Caleb didn't allow himself to think about her. Not really. There were moments, of course, fleeting memories triggered by a song on the radio or a photograph buried in a drawer. But they were wisps of thought, easy enough to push aside. He was too busy building a life, too busy being mother and father, and everything in between. Then, on a rainy Thursday afternoon, Caleb came home from the construction site, boots heavy with mud, body aching from another long day, to find a letter waiting on the kitchen counter. It was tucked between the usual mess bills, junk mail, a flyer for a local car wash. At first, he nearly missed it, but something about the handwriting caught his eye. His heart stumbled. The return address was blank, but the slanted loops and hurried scrawl on the front were unmistakable. Vanessa. He stood there for a long moment, the house buzzing with the sounds of life behind him. Nora and Evan bickering over a toy, Sophie singing off-key in the living room, Carter arguing with Logan over whose turn it was to load the dishwasher. A normal evening in the Harris household. But the letter in his hand felt like a live wire. He didn't open it, not right away. Instead, he slipped it into the pocket of his jacket and carried on with the evening as if nothing had happened. He made dinner spaghetti and meatballs from a jar and listened as the kids told stories about their day. All the while, the letter pressed against his side, a constant, unignorable weight. That night, after the kids had gone to bed and the house had finally settled into silence, Caleb sat at the kitchen table, the letter before him. He stared at it. He told himself he didn't care what it said. He told himself he wouldn't let it touch the life he'd fought so hard to build. But deep down, he knew it already had. For 3 days, the letter stayed sealed. He carried it with him everywhere to work, to the grocery store, even tucked beneath his pillow at night, but he couldn't bring himself to break the seal. What could she possibly have to say after all this time? Finally, on Sunday evening, after the kids were tucked into bed and the weight of it had become too much to bear, Caleb opened the envelope. The letter inside was handwritten, the ink slightly smudged as if from a trembling hand. Vanessa wrote about regret, about panic, about how overwhelmed she had felt all those years ago. She wrote about therapy, about faith, about how she had spent the last decade trying to rebuild herself. She apologized for leaving, for the silence, for the birthdays missed, and the milestones she hadn't been there to witness. And then came the real purpose of the letter. She wanted to see them. She wanted a second chance. She hoped, if Caleb could find it in his heart to forgive her, that the children might someday forgive her too. Caleb's hands trembled as he finished reading. Forgiveness. He thought of Logan, stepping up at an age when he should have been riding bikes and playing video games. He thought of Carter, who had stopped asking about his mother years ago and instead buried himself in schoolwork. He thought of Sophie, who still sometimes cried quietly at night when she thought no one could hear. He thought of Nora and Evan, who didn't remember Vanessa at all, who only knew Mom as a word other kids used. Forgiveness. It wasn't his alone to give. He folded the letter carefully and set it on the table. Days passed. Caleb didn't rush to tell the kids, not because he wanted to hide it, but because he needed to find the right way, the right time. He knew this wasn't just about Vanessa re-entering their lives. It was about reopening wounds that had never fully healed. Meanwhile, life marched on. Logan was deep into college applications. Carter had just made the varsity soccer team. Sophie was planning a dance recital. Nora and Evan were thriving in school. They were building futures. And now, Vanessa wanted to step back into the story she had abandoned. One evening, Caleb found himself at the construction site long after his shift had ended, sitting in his truck as rain pattered against the windshield. "Mr." Franklin knocked on the window. "You good, Harris?" Caleb rolled it down halfway. "Yeah." "Just thinking." Franklin studied him for a long moment. "Whatever it is," he said finally, "don't let it steal your peace." It was simple advice, but it struck Caleb harder than he expected. That night, he made a decision. His children deserved to know the truth, but whatever happened next would be their choice, not his. They had earned that right. So, on a quiet Sunday afternoon, Caleb gathered them around the kitchen table. Logan, Carter, Sophie, Nora, Evan, the 5 hearts he had spent a decade protecting. He laid the letter in the center of the table and told them everything. There were tears, there was anger, there was confusion. And there was a silence so heavy it seemed to bend the walls inward. But Caleb sat with it all. He didn't try to fix it. He didn't try to smooth it over. He simply bore witness to the storm he had no power to stop, because love, real love, wasn't about control. It was about standing steady when everything else threatened to fall apart, and Caleb Harris had spent 10 years learning exactly how to do that. After Caleb Harris laid the letter on the kitchen table, a silence stretched over the room that none of his children seemed eager to break. Logan Harris sat rigidly, arms crossed, jaw clenched tight. Carter Harris fidgeted with the edge of his sweatshirt, his gaze locked on the table. Sophie Harris hugged her knees to her chest, while Nora and Evan Harris looked between their older siblings with wide, uncertain eyes. For a long while, no one spoke. Caleb let them sit with it. He didn't rush them, didn't try to fill the heavy air with empty reassurances. He knew too well that some wounds needed to be aired out before they could begin to heal. Finally, Logan broke the silence. "Why now?" he asked, his voice low and rough. Caleb met his son's eyes. "I don't know," he said honestly. Logan shook his head, a bitter laugh escaping his throat. "She missed birthdays, first days of school, Christmases, everything. And now she wants back in?" Carter spoke up next, his voice shaking. "Is she really different?" Caleb sighed, running a hand over his face. "I don't know," he said again, "but she says she wants a chance to prove it." Sophie finally lifted her head, her small voice cutting through the tension. "Do we have to see her?" "No," Caleb said firmly. "You don't have to do anything you're not ready for. This is your choice." Nora tugged at his sleeve. But she's our mom, right? Caleb's heart broke a little more. She's the woman who gave you life, he said carefully. But family is who shows up, who stays. For days after that conversation, the household felt different. Quieter, heavier. The kids went about their routines, but there was a tension in the air that hadn't been there before. Logan became more withdrawn, spending long hours at the library under the pretense of studying. Carter grew snappish, quick to anger over little things. Sophie cried more easily. Nora and Evan clung to Caleb's side with a desperation that broke his heart. Caleb tried to hold it all together. He packed lunches, attended soccer games, helped with science projects. He tucked them into bed at night with extra hugs, trying to make up for the uncertainty gnawing at all of them. At work, he found it harder to focus. He dropped tools, mismeasured cuts, caught himself staring into the distance while others worked around him. Mr. Franklin pulled him aside one afternoon. "You're somewhere else, Harris. You need to get your head right." Caleb nodded mutely. He knew Franklin wasn't being cruel. He was worried. And Caleb was worried too. One evening, a few days after the letter was read, Caleb found Logan sitting alone on the back porch, staring up at the night sky. He sat down beside him, saying nothing at first. Finally, Logan spoke. "I don't remember what her voice sounds like." Caleb swallowed hard. "It's been a long time." Logan nodded slowly. "I don't know if I want to remember." Caleb put a hand on his son's shoulder. "You don't have to decide tonight, or tomorrow, or even next year." Inside, Sophie was drawing pictures at the kitchen table. Carter was kicking a ball against the side of the house, the dull thud, 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 a steady background noise. Nora and Evan were curled up on the couch, half asleep. It was a house built on resilience, but even the strongest foundations could crack under enough pressure. Later that night, after the kids had gone to bed, Caleb found himself staring at the letter again. He hated how much power it seemed to hold over all of them. He thought about Vanessa, about the girl he had fallen in love with all those years ago, about the woman who had once laughed so easily and dreamed so freely. He thought about how fear and failure and weakness had twisted her into someone who could leave her family without a second glance. And he thought about the people sitting under his roof, now the ones who had stayed, the ones who had fought beside him through every scraped knee, every overdue bill, every lonely holiday. Forgiveness was complicated. It wasn't as simple as saying, "I forgive you," and moving on. It was a process, a wound that had to scab over and scar before it could stop hurting. And Caleb wasn't sure if that process could or should include Vanessa anymore. He decided then that no matter what happened, he would protect his children first, their peace, their progress, their future. If Vanessa truly wanted to earn a place back in their lives, she would have to do it on their terms. No manipulations. No guilt trips, no rewriting of history. The next morning at breakfast, he made an announcement. "We'll meet her," he said simply, "but it'll be in a place we choose, on a day we decide, and if at any point you want to leave, we leave." Logan looked skeptical. Carter looked wary. Sophie looked scared, but slowly, one by one, they nodded. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, maybe not ever. But it was a first step, not for Vanessa, but for them. A step toward facing the past head-on, together. And whatever came next, Caleb knew this much. they would face it side by side. As a family. The way they always had. As the day of the meeting approached, Caleb Harris found himself weighed down by a growing sense of unease. Something about the timing, the vagueness of Vanessa Cole's letter, the suddenness of her reappearance, it all gnawed at the back of his mind. Caleb knew better than most that people didn't change overnight, and he wasn't about to let anything or anyone threaten the fragile peace he had fought so hard to build for his children. On a quiet Wednesday evening, after the kids had gone to bed, Caleb made a decision. He pulled out his phone, scrolling through contacts until he found the number of an old friend, a private investigator he had once worked with during his time in construction security. "Frank," he said when the line picked up, "I need a favor." Within hours, Frank was on the case. Caleb didn't want speculation. He didn't want rumors. He wanted the truth cold, hard, undeniable. Over the next several days, life at the Harris house moved cautiously forward. The kids attended school, soccer practices, dance rehearsals. Caleb kept the letter tucked safely away, not wanting them to be reminded of it every time they sat at the kitchen table. Meanwhile, Frank worked quietly in the background. It didn't take long for the pieces to start coming together. On Friday afternoon, Caleb's phone buzzed as he left the construction site. "Got something?" Frank said. Caleb's stomach tightened. They met at a small diner on the edge of town, tucked into a corner booth where conversations could be private. Frank slid a thin manila folder across the table. Caleb opened it with trembling hands. Inside were printouts from public records, social media posts, screenshots of online fundraisers. Vanessa's life over the past decade was laid bare before him. It wasn't a story of redemption. It was a story of survival and desperation. Multiple addresses, most lasting less than a year. Evictions. Maxed out credit cards. Small claims lawsuits from landlords and credit unions. A GoFundMe page titled "Starting Over After Setbacks," asking for financial help rebuilding life after mistakes. Photos showed her smiling with strangers, but the captions told a different story, one of loss, instability, and regret. The worst part wasn't the debt or the transient lifestyle. It was the revelation that Vanessa had mentioned Caleb and the children repeatedly on public forums, framing her narrative around reconnecting with her family to garner sympathy and, ultimately, financial support. Caleb's hands curled into fists. She wasn't reaching out because she missed them. She was reaching out because she needed a lifeline. "I'm sorry, man," Frank said quietly. "I wish it were better news." Caleb nodded stiffly. Better to know now. Driving home, the anger in Caleb's chest simmered, not just anger for himself, but for his children. They deserved better than to be used as pawns in someone else's redemption story. He pulled into the driveway just as the sun was setting, the house bathed in golden light. Inside, the kids were finishing dinner. Logan glanced up from a textbook. Carter was helping Sophie clear the table. Nora and Evan giggled over a spilled glass of milk. His family. His home. Built with patience, sacrifice, and love, not perfect, but real. He wasn't about to let someone waltz back into their lives and tear it all apart. That evening, after dinner, Caleb gathered them around once again. He laid the manila folder on the table, much as he had laid the letter before. "You deserve to know everything," he said. Together, they went through the documents. The kids processed it in different ways. Logan's jaw tightened, his shoulders squaring as if preparing for battle. Carter shook his head in disbelief. anger flashing in his eyes. Sophie cried quietly, her heart too big to harden easily. Nora and Evan didn't fully understand, but they clung to Caleb's sides, sensing the gravity of the moment. "She's not coming back for us," Logan said finally. "She's coming back because she needs something." Caleb nodded, pride and sorrow warring inside him. "It's not your job to fix her," he said. "What do we do now?" Carter asked. "We decide together," Caleb replied. "We choose what's best for us." Over the next few days, they talked. Not just about Vanessa, but about the life they had built without her. About the memories they had made. About the family they had become. Caleb listened more than he spoke. He let them vent, rage, cry, question. He offered no easy answers, because there weren't any. But through it all, one thing became clear. They were stronger together, not because they had never been hurt, but because they had survived the hurt and grown. By the end of the week, Caleb made another call, this time to a lawyer. He wanted everything in writing: custody arrangements, visitation terms, boundaries that would protect his children's hearts as fiercely as he had protected their lives. And if Vanessa truly wanted to be part of their lives, she would have to earn that right. Slowly, respectfully. On their terms, not hers. Because love wasn't a tool. It wasn't a bargaining chip. It was a choice, and Caleb Harris had already made his. The day of the meeting arrived under a heavy sky, thick with clouds that threatened rain, but never quite delivered. It matched Caleb Harris's mood, perfectly unsettled, heavy, bracing for a storm. He chose the park carefully. Public, open, a place where the kids could leave if it became too much. He didn't want them trapped, didn't want them feeling obligated to stay a moment longer than they wanted. They arrived early, bundled in jackets against the chilly air. Caleb stood by the duck pond with Logan, Carter, Sophie, Nora, and Evan clustered around him like satellites. Nerves buzzed in the air, silent but palpable. Logan paced restlessly. Carter kicked at pebbles. Sophie twisted the hem of her sweater between her fingers. Nora and Evan huddled close, their small faces drawn tight with worry they didn't have the words to express. Caleb kept checking his watch, though he didn't need to. He would feel her presence before he ever saw her. And he was right. Vanessa Cole appeared from across the field, walking slowly, her figure slightly hunched against the cold. She looked thinner than he remembered, older. Her coat was too thin for the weather, and her hands were shoved deep into her pockets. As she approached, Caleb could see the uncertainty written all over her face. She wasn't sure how to do this, how to bridge a decade of silence and absence. She stopped a few feet away, her eyes darting from one child to the next. "I've missed you all," she said, her voice shaking. None of the kids responded. Micah crossed their arms tightly across their chest. Carter stared at the ground. Sophie pressed herself against Caleb's side. Nora and Evan looked everywhere except at the woman standing before them. Vanessa tried again. She spoke about being lost, about how hard life had been without them, about how she had found faith again, found herself, how she wanted to be part of their lives if they would let her. Her words felt rehearsed, polished, for an audience she didn't understand anymore. They weren't the same children she had left, and they didn't owe her the response she seemed to expect. Finally, Logan stepped forward. Their voice was calm, steady, but the pain beneath it was unmistakable. "What do you expect from us now?" Vanessa's mouth opened, then closed again. She had no answer, because deep down, even she must have realized there was no easy path back. The meeting didn't last long. There were no hugs, no joyful reunions, no promises of second chances sealed with teary embraces. Only a heavy, aching silence, broken by the occasional quack of a duck or the rustling of dry leaves across the pavement. As they turned to leave, Vanessa called after them. "I hope you'll let me try." No one answered. In the car ride home, the kids were quieter than Caleb had ever seen them. No one fought over the radio. No one asked for fast food. They simply stared out the windows, lost in their own thoughts. Back at home, Caleb made dinner. Macaroni and cheese comfort food. Something easy, something familiar. They ate in near silence. Even Evan, usually a chatterbox, pushed his food around his plate without much interest. Afterward, Caleb found Logan standing in the hallway, staring at an old family photo. It was from years ago, a Christmas, where they had worn matching pajamas, piled together on the couch. Vanessa wasn't in it. "She didn't even ask how we've been," Logan said, their voice breaking slightly. Caleb joined him, resting a hand on his shoulder. "I noticed," he said quietly. "I don't remember what her laugh sounds like," Logan admitted. Caleb squeezed his shoulder gently. "You remember what matters." In the days that followed, the tension didn't lift. At school, Sophie's teacher called to say she seemed distracted. Carter got into an argument at soccer practice. Nora started having nightmares again. Even Evan, too young to articulate his feelings, grew clingier, reluctant to leave Caleb's side for even a moment. Caleb knew they had made the right decision to meet her, to hear her out, but he also knew the damage ran deeper than a simple encounter could fix. One night, as Caleb tucked Sophie into bed, she asked the question he had been dreading. "Daddy, does she still love us?" He brushed a strand of hair from her forehead and kissed her gently. "I think she loves who she remembers you were," he said. "But she doesn't know who you've become." Sophie frowned. "I don't think I want to know her anymore." Caleb's heart broke and healed all at once. He hugged her tightly. "That's okay, baby. You get to choose." Later that night, Caleb sat alone at the kitchen table, the weight of it all pressing down on him. He thought about forgiveness, what it meant, who deserved it, and whether it was even possible when so much had been lost. He didn't have all the answers, but he knew one thing for certain. He would never let anyone, not even their mother, hurt his children again. Not physically. Not emotionally. Not in ways they didn't even have words for yet. Whatever future they built from here, it would be one of their own making. With love, with honesty, and with the unwavering strength of a father who had already walked through fire to protect them. Vanessa's chapter in their story had ended long ago. And now, Caleb realized, so had any power she held over them. They were no longer the family she had left behind. They were the family Caleb had built. Stronger, wiser, unbreakable. In the days following the painful meeting at the park, the Harris home slowly settled into a new rhythm. It wasn't immediate, and it wasn't perfect, but little by little, the heavy cloud that had hovered over them began to lift. Caleb Harris made a conscious decision. He would not let the past dictate their future. At dinner one evening, after plates were scraped clean and the younger kids were chasing each other around the living room, Caleb called for a family meeting. Logan, Carter, Sophie, Nora, and Evan gathered around the kitchen table, their safe place, their anchor. "We need to decide how we move forward," Caleb said. Logan leaned back in their chair, arms crossed, while Carter tapped his foot anxiously under the table. Sophie chewed her lip, Nora fiddled with the hem of her sweater, and Evan swung his legs, too small to reach the floor. "This is your home," Caleb continued, "your life. No one gets to disrupt that without your say-so, not even her." They discussed it openly, honestly. No pretending, no pressure. Each child voiced their feelings. Logan was the first to speak. "I don't want her around," Logan said flatly. "She left. She doesn't get to just come back." Carter nodded in agreement. "I don't trust her." Sophie wiped away silent tears. "I wanted her to be different," she whispered. "But she's not." Nora clung to Caleb's arm. "I don't even remember her." And Evan, in his small, clear voice, said, "We already have a family." Caleb felt a swell of pride so powerful it nearly knocked the air from his lungs. They had survived. They had grown, and they had done it together. "Then that's our decision," Caleb said firmly. "We move forward. We don't look back." The next step was putting protections in place. Caleb met with his lawyer again, finalizing documents that made it clear any attempt by Vanessa to disrupt their lives without following the proper channels would be legally blocked. He wasn't taking any chances. He also updated his will, setting up trusts for each child. It wasn't about money, they didn't have much, but it was about security, about making sure that no matter what happened to him, his children would be protected. He wanted them to know that someone had fought for them, chosen them, loved them without conditions. Weeks turned into months. Slowly, the tightness around their home began to loosen. There were soccer games to attend, school projects to help with, dance recitals to cheer through. Life didn't stop for heartache. It marched on, stubborn and insistent, and they marched with it. One evening, after a particularly raucous game of Monopoly that ended in laughter and overturned hotels, Caleb tucked Sophie into bed. She clutched her stuffed bear tightly. "Are we going to be okay, Daddy?" she asked. Caleb brushed her hair back from her forehead and smiled. "We already are," he said. In small, powerful ways, they reclaimed their peace. Friday movie nights became sacred again. Caleb and the kids baked cookies that somehow always burned around the edges but tasted perfect anyway. They decorated the house for holidays with handmade crafts and inside jokes. At work, Caleb noticed a change too. The heaviness that had made him sluggish and distracted began to lift. He threw himself into projects, earned praise from Mr. Franklin, and even began mentoring some of the younger guys on the crew. He found himself laughing more, sleeping better, breathing easier. The past hadn't disappeared, it never would, but it no longer ruled him. He wasn't surviving anymore. He was living. One Saturday afternoon, Caleb took the kids to the lake. They spent hours splashing in the water, building sandcastles, and eating soggy sandwiches under the sun. As the day wound down, Caleb watched his children laughing, teasing, running wild and free. They were okay. Better than okay. They were whole. Later that night, as he sat on the porch with a cup of coffee cradled in his hands, Logan joined him. They sat in comfortable silence for a long time before Logan spoke. "You saved us, you know." Caleb smiled, staring out into the twilight. "No," he said softly. "We saved each other." And it was true. Through heartbreak, through betrayal, through years of sacrifice and struggle, they had built something unbreakable. Not a perfect family, a real one. Bound by loyalty, by love, by the choice to stay even when it would have been easier to walk away. Vanessa had been a chapter in their story, but she was not the story. They were, and their story was far from over. Whatever challenges came next, college applications, teenage heartbreaks, job changes, new homes, they would face them the same way they always had. Together, with open hands, with open hearts, and with the kind of quiet, stubborn strength that could weather any storm. Because this wasn't the family that was left behind, this was the family Caleb Harris had built. Stronger, wiser, and forever unshaken. In life, we often carry the weight of choices we never made. Caleb Harris's story reminds us that true family is not built by blood alone, but by the everyday decisions to stay, to fight, and to love, even when it's hard. His quiet resilience teaches a profound truth. Being present matters more than any grand gesture. It is easy to walk away when things become overwhelming. It's much harder and infinitely braver to stay. Caleb didn't choose to become a single parent of 5 overnight, yet every morning he made the conscious choice to show up. Through the sleepless nights, the missed milestones, and the silent heartbreak, he chose his children. He built a foundation of trust that no apology years later could replace. Forgiveness, another theme woven deeply through this story, is shown not as an obligation, but as a choice rooted in wisdom. Forgiveness does not mean erasing the past or pretending hurt never happened. It means acknowledging the pain while refusing to let it define the future. Caleb teaches us that forgiveness can coexist with boundaries, a powerful lesson for anyone who has carried old wounds. Perhaps most importantly, Caleb's journey demonstrates that healing doesn't come from waiting for someone else to right their wrongs. It comes from within, from choosing peace over resentment, love over bitterness, and strength over despair. His children thrived not because life was easy, but because they learned they were worth fighting for. For those of us who have lived long enough to carry both deep scars and deep joys, Caleb's story resonates as a call to remember what truly matters, not perfection, not appearances, but the daily, steadfast acts of love that shape a life of meaning. In the end, we are not remembered for the moments we wish we could erase, but for the moments we stood firm when no one was watching, simply because it was right. And that, perhaps, is the greatest legacy any of us can hope to leave behind.